let's start just with how do we get from something that is not considered a violent crime or something that is, quote unquote serious. How do we end up putting people in jail? Like, how do they get there versus somebody who gets a parking ticket, they pay it, and they could never even imagine going to jail for something like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think one is you start with over-policing, right? Which is who's most likely to get a ticket, right? And the reality is the poorer, the blacker, the browner the neighborhood, the more likely you are to get a ticket in it, the more likely you are. I mean, I did something with an organization called Defy, which is where you go volunteer in a prison, and then it's mostly tech folks. And it was so interesting because for all these tech folks, folks who were in jail, one guy said, I'm in jail for 7 years, I did this, and all the tech folks were like, I did that. And so just the stark reality that someone in America experiences the exact same thing, does the exact same thing, and there are no consequences because they have the resources to stop the consequences. So one is just starts with the over policing. And so the likelihood that you're more likely to get a ticket, the more likelihood you're more likely to be arrested. And then I think the way it works, we've seen it, is you might get a parking ticket. And this, in some states, it doesn't work like this. In some states, you can't go to jail for having a parking ticket, which is great. You might get a parking ticket. And then usually what happens is that you can't afford to pay it. And so either the fee increases or the consequence happens. So it might be you lose your driver's license. And then you're driving on a driver's license and you get arrested for a suspended driver's license. And so one thing is we were sitting in Michigan and we were talking with some folks about our software, and we were looking at who are the people most likely to not show up for court. And what we saw is it was people who were driving on suspended driver's licenses. And so you thought we were talking about they were saying, oh, bail should probably be high. And the idea that it's mostly working people who have kids, who have jobs, who are trying to drive their kids to school, and that those folks are the people that pay the consequences or face jail because they're broke, it is not, I think, what the system is designed to do. And I think you're seeing a lot of that right now where people are saying, look, the police are not acting in a way that's consistent with trying to uphold law. It's more about kind of the oppression of some versus the oppression of others. And so that's it. So you end up in jail. Basically, you can't pay something, the consequences increase. And we look at it like we just started a new software. And the reason we did is because we found payments were really difficult. And so we launched a second product called Promise Pay. And the reason is because we were looking at parking tickets. How do people end up in trouble? And we looked at one city and we said, how could I, like, if I wanted to put myself on a payment plan, and the requirement was you have to owe over like $500. So you have to wait until it's so expensive. Then you have to pay 50% upfront. Then you have to bring your tax returns to prove that you deserve to put yourself on a payment plan. And you have to go down to this office downtown during the work week. Like, it's just, the system isn't designed to make someone successful. And so part of what we thought about is how do you build kind of products that actually are designed for people to succeed? Could you imagine if I called my cable bill and I said, I can't pay it? And they said, well, bring your tax returns, come down, you pay half up front. Like, it's not reasonable.
Yeah, and it feels like some of this is intentional. I mean, some of it is just, frankly, you've got bureaucratic organizations that have no clue the realities on the ground, right? So something as simple as, a quote unquote good intentioned rule is, hey, bring your tax plan. We'd love to get you on a payment plan. Sounds like we're helping people, but for all the reasons you're explaining, actually end up causing more and more of a problem, right?
Yeah, it's weird. Until I was in the system, I thought it was just like racism or other folks. When you're in it, you realize the system is actually designed that way. And the more I'm in it, the more I see it. I joke that being in the system, I've become a conspiracy theorist. And for me, it was made clear when someone said to me, I said, oh, this product will work this way. It'll be great. And the person who runs the system said, oh, this is a difference. I don't care about people in the system. And I was like, that level of clarity of just, we don't care about people in the system was very important for me to understand. I remember someone saying about a prison system that we talked to, and they said, we wouldn't let our dogs be in this prison. And so the idea that the people who might be operating a system don't think that their own dog should be in that system or have no care speaks to how the system works. And, so I think I've definitely become more, I think the system is working the way it was designed to work.
So explain that a little bit more. When you say designed this way, do you mean designed to imprison people, and this is more of like the private prison type, issues? Or is this more of just putting as many obstacles in place as possible. And then therefore that either leads to more revenue for the government and possibly jail time, or kind of just clarify that a little bit.
To me, I think there's a dehumanization of Black and brown people and poor people. And then I think there is just the reality of the consequences. No system that punishes people for not having money is when it's government. It's one thing, right? If I get a product and I'm doing something and then I don't pay for it, that's very different than the assumption that you're going to pay for something that the government provides, or that the consequences. Like, I realized where I live, they turn you into collections for library fees, and which is, doesn't make any sense to me. So I think the system just works in the way, and that it criminalizes things like poverty. It criminalizes, and the consequences are very different if you have good representation, as an example. One of what's been great about our work is we have people volunteer to help us. And we have had a number of people who have had issues with the SEC try to come to us and say, hey, we get this system stinks and how it's awful. And when you have good representation, the consequences are very different than someone who has bad representation. And where we see it is, we see it in someone, let's say you are waiting in court, you go to court, you have some type of thing you've been charged with, then you end up waiting in jail. Because remember, you can't afford bail, so you're sitting in jail. So then you take a plea deal. And the plea deal has no time associated with it, but you can go back to jail with a technical violation. A technical violation could be you miss a meeting with your probation officer, you go to what we saw an example, someone got married outside of the county, so they technically left the county. And so people end up in jail a lot for technical violations, and often because due process goes away with a technical violation. So you don't have a right to a trial in the same way anymore. And so that's, I think, how the system doesn't work, is I can't afford to get out, so I take a plea deal that might not make sense for me, and then I end up in trouble with a technical violation that takes away due process.